Hi guys, welcome to my CCR number 1, Codes and Conventions. So I've realized that I've utilized a lot of technical and visual elements as storytelling devices in my opening sequence, the 1001st Crane. And so I think a director's breakdown would be the best way for me to explain those choices to you. I have divided into certain elements such as genres and narrative, character, mise en scene, equipment, cinematography, and color grading, as well as lighting and sound. And I know that there are a lot more elements, but I think it's better for me to focus on certain elements and explain my intentions between each of them so that you'd get a better understanding. And so in this director's breakdown, I'm going to be playing my opening sequence for about 3 to 4 times each, and after each time we're going to analyze some sections. For example, before playing the first one, I'm going to ask you to focus on the sections of genre and narrative, and after that we're going to analyze the sequence based on genre and narrative, and next time I'm going to ask you to focus more on character and how it's conveyed throughout the sequence, and it just continues like that for about 3 to 4 times. So yeah, let's continue. About our 2-minute film opening is a fusion of drama, coming of age, and romance. And while my initial creative decision was influenced by Asian coming of age cinema, media that offers comfort and accessibility, the intention was not to replicate familiar formulas. Instead, I aimed to engage with Steve Neal's theory that genre is defined by repetition and difference. Our product conforms to recognizable genre conventions while simultaneously subverting them in order to explore deeper themes of memory, of mental wellness, and also even the idea of fate in an Asian media landscape. So yeah, now I'd like to split into different parts, including narrative choice, visual choices, technical choices, and from these sections, I will analyze deeper the choices I made, why, what conventions that we do subvert or conform to, as well as how these choices affect the overall narrative or visual style of our product. I will also include some of my research on professional products in here so that you get a better understanding. So let's watch the first watch. Let's have the first watch of the 1001st Crane together.
Forever to touch you.
Okay, that's the end of first watch. And so after this first watch, I'm going to focus on the two components of genres, narrative, as well as characters. So let's get right into that. I'm going to try to speak slowly, since when I speak very fast, I tend to stutter. So please be a little bit understanding, since that's just me. I speak very fast. Okay. For my AS level media studies project, I want to balance classical narrative theory with a more introspective and contemporary approach. At first glance, you think that the opening may seem to resist the structure, but it still loosely aligns with Todorov's equilibrium model, in the sense that instead of the beginning with a clear equilibrium, the film starts in sort of a false equilibrium, a quiet, emotionally stagnant routine that's repeated again and again and again. The narrative begins in the present, obviously, and only gradually returns to the past at the end, which allows the story to unfold in fragments rather than a linear kind of sequence. I think that this resists a traditional chronological structure and instead places emphasis on memory and emotional reconstruction. This approach shaped how I worked within and against genre. And in drama and coming-of-age films such as Lady Bird or The Perks of Being a Wallflower, characters is often introduced through everyday routines and personal conflict. I followed this by using Kwon's repetitive actions and environment to establish his emotional state and physical state also. At the same time, coming-of-age and romance films like Call Me By Your Name often present love as something transformative and worth pursuing or reclaiming. I think I subverted this through the fact that in the 1001st Crane, love is not a goal to be regained, even though it is the romance genre. The relationship between Kwon and the mystery girl, like the girl standing at the balcony and looks up at him before the sequence ends, exists only in the past. It's in the past, and it cannot be restored, because then it shifts the focus away from external resolution and toward more of internal conflict, aligning the film more closely with psychological dramas like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where memory and emotion drive the narrative. At the same time, I think that I still conform to the general conventions of the themes of longing, of identity, and memory that remain central throughout the entire narrative, which are key elements that are presented in most romance and coming-of-age stories. However, instead of presenting truth or love as something stable or ideal or something that he can get back to, I framed them as fragmented and possibly unreliable. I think this is because it's slightly overexposed, and it might be through the lens of Kwon or through his memory. We're seeing his own perception, because it might be his own perception of the past. It might be unreliable. It might not be the truth. The opening also presents recovery as the gradual, internal process rather than a clear resolution. For example, symbols like the crane painting that repeats again and again every single time before the routine restarts again, reflect his own attempt to reconnect with himself, and through the use of fragments of the past at the end, the audience, I think, can piece together meaning alongside him, making the experience of his grief and his memory become more subjective. Overall, I think that this shows that the genre and narrative frameworks I used in the 1001st Crane can be flexible. While I draw on familiar conventions, I reshape them to reflect a more internal and nonlinear emotional journey. Other than genres and narrative, I also, through the use of characters, evoke meaning. I will be focusing on the two main groups presented in the sequence, the friend group and the main character, who is Kwon. You can see him here. Kwon, who is the main protagonist, challenges the conventional portrayal of male leads in the same genres, because typically these characters are depicted as stoic, as strong, composed, and sometimes even emotionally distant. In contrast, I focus more on Kwon's vulnerability, and it's very central to his character through the fact that he practices his own routine every single day. He wakes up at 6 a.m., he makes his coffee, cut his eggs, and everything. You can also see that he is not conventionally attractive, and he's awkward, and he's overly melancholic because the entire sequence is just it presented as very messy, very fragmented. It's as if like we're inside his head, and it's very like disheveled right now. And I think that this very nature and his own routine and how he sees himself as in the mirror make him feel more realistic and human. He also breaks from another key convention, the way age is represented in many movies. In many romance and drama films, like typically Asian, but I think as general also, men in their late 20s are often shown as relatively stable, like both emotionally and financially, which allows their narrative to focus on external goals like relationships. For example, films like La La Land or Before Sunrise portray young adults navigating love with a clearer sense of stability and independence and direction. But in contrast, coming-of-age films such as Ladybird or Perks of Being a Wallflower or even the HBO show Euphoria tend to focus more on teenagers dealing with their identity, uncertainty, and social pressure. Kwon is a character that exists between these two stages, and he also belongs to, somehow conforms to the both of the conventions of the two kinds of like genres. Although he is like in his late 20s, like as you can see, he clearly has a job. He still experiences struggles typically associated with adolescence, identity crisis, self-doubt, and confusion. Okay, let me turn that back because that may be confusing. If you have not noticed, I think it's subtly suggested through mise en scene. Like for instance, the architectural sketch on his desk, like right in the center of it, implies that he has a job, possibly as an architect himself, but he lacks stability and direction. He also seems to struggle a little bit with commitment, as well as he forgets basic responsibilities and fails to meet expectations. And I think this can be seen through the fact that he writes a lot of sticky notes and like reminders for himself inside the notebooks, because as a way, they are ways for him to remember his task, and the fact that he constantly tears off and crushes his sketches also represent the fact that he is blocked creatively. He is also disconnected somehow from his own passion, art, as shown through his difficulties with drawing every time before the routine sequence is reset. I think that by representing my character Kwon in this way, I want to reflect a more realistic perspective that these struggles do not simply disappear with age. There's both challenges and conforms to general conventions. While I still explore themes of identity and emotional growth, I shift them onto a character who would be traditionally be portrayed as more stable and more independent, and through that I can highlight a more uncertain and prolonged transition into adulthood. At the same time, Kwon is deeply romantic and sentimental. I think that I subtly suggested this through the fact that he has a fixation on the crane, the painting itself. Like, it's the bridge that connects his identity to his youthful past, and that's why he keeps returning to the painting, unable to like have progress. And then it only transitions into the flashback sequence when he finally picks up his paintbrush and like connect the two cranes together. And this past is tied to the mystery girl, the girl that stands next to him on the balcony and look at him while holding her handycam. And although this becomes a key part of his character, since throughout the sequence he revisits the painting of the crane again and again and again, but it is not necessarily a straightforward romantic connection. She can be, interpreted as a representation of an idealized past, a version of his life before that where he felt more free and less burdened by expectation of society or adult life. I think this ambiguity, I don't know if I pronounced that right. It's like this uncertainty. I don't know what word to do. I think you get my point. It's like uncertain, it's unclear, but on purpose is intentional. And that is reinforced through the cassette tapes, which act as the catalyst that shifts him from a passive state into a more active attempt to confront his emotions, or rather confront his own past. And rather than play purely stemming from love, his attachment to this past also reflects self-loathing and hatred and a lot of regrets. Kwon uses this idealized version of his reality as a way to justify his inaction and his isolation in the present, and to escape the pressure he places on himself in daily life. Additionally, the supporting characters, or as I would like to call the four little rascals, they function more as like sidekicks or a group of like I said, rascals tied to his own past. And rather than being fully developed as independent arcs, they align with prop character theory, where characters take on roles that support the protagonist's journey. In this case, they can be seen as helpers, potentially guiding him back toward connection and self-understanding. This means that the film still conforms somehow to narrative conventions, as these characters do contribute to his emotional progression, but at the same time, it also rejects and conforms to typical representations of teenage life. Coming-of-age films often present youth as a golden era, filled with freedom and self-discovery, and in reality, teenage life are also shaped by pressure, by confusion, and identity struggles. The 1001st Crane acknowledges this, and it frames the past in a more chaotic and vibrant way, and also through a more idealized lens. This is not meant to present youth objectively. It's not the truth. It can never be the truth, but yeah, I think that this youth appears like the golden age, and more chaotic, more energetic, more vibrant in a way that really represents the fact that he is like glorifying this memory of it, and as a result, it feels more heightened, more like an escape from the present, like he himself is trying to escape from his own reality, and it reflects how he uses memory to disconnect from his life, or to process his grief over the loss of, for example, passion over time, or even a very important figure in his life. In this way, I think, the film both conforms to and challenges convention, presenting youth as meaningful and emotionally intense, but it also suggests that this version of the past may be incomplete or distorted. Overall, my reflection is that I use conventional character frameworks as a starting point, but I successfully subverted them through flawed behavior, ambiguity, and a more internalized narrative, and this allowed the characters, especially Kwon himself, to feel familiar yet more grounded in reality, and also a little bit unpredictable. Next, I'm going to be focusing on prop and costume, as well as the use of equipment. We're going to watch the sequence again, and please focus on prop and costume and equipment, and we will analyze it together. Let's watch.
forever to touch you.
Okay, let's move on to prop and costume. One of my favorite parts ever when making the movie itself, making the short opening itself, when constructing the mise-en-scene of the 1001st Crane, I, particularly through, setting costume and props, I want to use them as a way to communicate his own psychological state without relying too much on dialogue. In many Asian dramas, specifically Asian dramas, spaces are often stylized and visually pleasing even when characters are struggling. For example, films like In the Mood for Love or Crash Landing on You present intimate spaces that still feel aesthetically composed. I followed the convention of using domestic space to reflect inner life and personality of the characters, but also I reject this polished look. Instead, I chose a more crammed Asian house filled with dust and decay to reflect stagnation and neglect. As you can see that the architecture of the house, particularly through the fridge and the sink and the floorboards and the cabinets, they all feel old and they all feel old-fashioned because they are old. I filmed in my old house where I grew up in the first 10 years of my life, so that's why it has kind of a slightly older kind of architecture. And yeah, so in terms of costume also, I also reject more conventional forms of character presentation. Rather than dressing Kwon in a carefully styled outfit that would make him visually appealing or socially legible, I kept him in pajamas, as you can see here, as he propped up one phone with his head. You can see his pajama here. Which immediately signals exhaustion, passivity, and emotional withdrawal. His costume suggests that he is barely participating in daily life. He does not appear prepared for the outside world, nor does he seem interested in presenting himself to others. In this way, I think that the costume conforms to the realist convention of using clothing to reveal the character, but also it challenges the more romanticized and idealized presentation often found in Juve or relationship-driven films where the protagonists still tend to look kind of composed even in distress. Props also play a central role in shaping meaning. Objects like crumbled paper, abandoned canvases, instant coffee suggest a repetitive survival-based routine and a blocked creative life. This follows convention commonly in many dramas and art films of using props as emotional indicators of a character's internal state. And I will be diving deeper into two key symbolic props that I used here, which is you should really pay attention to these props because they play a pretty big part in the opening. The two key symbolic props here are the crane painting and the cassette tapes I see here. The crane carries strong cultural meaning. It is often associated with longevity, luck, and healing, and is widely recognized through the legend of the Thousand Cranes, where whoever folds them is believed to be granted a wish. In the short opening itself, the crane painting acts as a physical turning point in Kwon's routine. When he carefully traces over the pencil outline, it shows his desire to reconnect with something meaningful and escape his current life. However, the act of tracing rather than creating or painting also suggests that he is stuck, repeating the same thing, the same cycle, without making any real progress at all. On some level, it reflects both hope and entrapment at the same time. This changes when he opens the drawer and takes out the spade, and that moment breaks the routine. And instead of passively following the outline, he begins to act. He begins to connect the two cranes together using red paint, and this is when the past starts to fully emerge. It signals a shift from repetition to change and suggests that there might be a possibility of a new beginning, hence the title The 1001st Crane. And the use of red paint to connect the two cranes here, as I said before, is also significant. It can be read as a symbol of fate linking two people together, might be Kwon and the mystery girl, but it can also represent his own desires and emotions spilling into reality. The line feels intrusive, it cross over the actual outlining that he did before, as if his imagination is no longer contained, blurring the boundary between what is real and what he longs for. On the other hand, the cassette tape itself, shown before the flashback sequences, also acts as a bridge between the present and the past, because cassette tapes are physical objects that store analog sound. They often symbolize memory, distance, or loss. Here, they also suggest a connection to the mysterious girl seen with Kwon on the balcony. They might even be interpreted as intimate gifts, allowing the audience to infer a romantic bond between them. At the same time, they raise questions whether she is linked to his current grief and how much of a past is being remembered versus imagined. It's a very interesting concept for me because the flashback sequence you can see is as if it's shot on a very grainy camcorder, and at last we see a girl holding a camcorder. So we wonder to ourselves if that flashback sequence shown to us is the actual reality seen through Kwon's objective point of view, or is it is it what is filmed on Javi's camcorder, or is it a more idealized version of Kwon, a past that he created for himself as a way to escape from reality? I will be discussing this more in the later slides, so yeah, just keep that in mind. So I will just come to the conclusion. Overall, I think that I use prop design and costume to both follow and challenge conventions, and while I use familiar elements like setting, costume, and symbolic props to reflect character, I also avoid the polished or aesthetic typical of the genre, and instead, the space that Kwon lives in feels genuinely neglected and lived in, and more relatable, and grounding his state in something more physical and make his sense of entrapment more immediate to viewers. Use of equipment. I think that I successfully use equipment to divide between the present and the past. I follow the convention where handheld camera movement reminds the viewers that someone is physically holding the camera. And here, it is the mysterious girl, or I can just call her Habi from now on. Her name is V. It places the audience inside the moment as a participant rather than a detached observer. In my film itself, this suggests that we may be seeing through Kwon's perspective. It encourages viewers to connect this lively, joyful, energetic past with the protagonist introduced earlier and question what really happened to him to lead him to this point. My research into professional media also influenced how I use equipment as both a technical and symbolic device in the 1001st Train. I was particularly inspired by Ditto by New Jeans, especially its use of the handheld, VHS-style footage to create emotional and temporal contrast. I used different equipment to separate Kwon's present and past. The present, as in the bathroom sequence and the routine sequence, is filmed with a professional digital camera, creating almost a clean but also slightly messy and distant image. The past, however, appears to be shot on a handycam, especially since we earlier see Kwon inserting a tape. However, I intentionally kept this ambiguous, remember what I told you to keep in mind, the last slide. The footage might not strictly be from V's camcorder. It could be also Kwon's own perspective of his own memory. Because this period reflects when he was happiest, it feels slightly overexposed and dreamlike and suggests a more idealized and possibly distorted version of the past. And this links to the idea that the past is not shown objectively but shaped by his own desires. For example, the red paint connecting the two cranes on the canvas can be read as symbolizing fate, but also his own longing and imagination breaking into reality. In this sense, there is no fixed meaning. Instead, the interpretation is open and depends on the audience itself. The audience themselves aligning with Stuart Hall encoding and decoding model, where meaning is constructed differently by each viewer. While using different formats follows the convention of signaling time shifts, I also challenge the usual hierarchy. Typically, high quality footage feels more real. But in my film, real as in more important. More significant. But in my film, the present appears colder and less alive despite being visually cleaner. In contrast, the grainy, handheld footage feels more intimate and more lively and more emotionally truthful. Overall, I think that I successfully use the equipment to both follow and challenge convention. The contrast between the two formats reflects his own experience, Kwon's own experience. His presence is controlled but empty, while his past feels vivid, emotional, but yet possibly idealized. Next, I'm going to be focused on color and cinematography. I think that you should really pay a lot of attention to this rewatch. Let's get into it.
Forever to touch you.
Okay, let's continue with color. One of my favorites. When shaping the visual style of the film, I wanted the color and camera work to reflect his own state of mind rather than relying too heavily on dialogue. In many coming-of-age and romance films, cinematography often follows familiar conventions such as warm lighting, soft golden tones, and balanced compositions to create intimacy and emotional accessibility. For example, films like Call Me By Your Name and Lady Bird use warm, naturalistic colors palettes to evoke nostalgia, groove, and connection between the characters. However, I will provide you with some pictures for you to visualize easier. In the 1001st Screen, I moved away from these conventions. Instead of warmth, I use a green kind of cyan tint in the present day scenes, particularly in the bathroom sequence and when he's in front of the canvas. This kind of color palette is more commonly associated with psychological or clinical environments, as seen in films like The Matrix or The Nightcrawler. What I find interesting is that the 1001st Screen is not a psychological thriller, but rather a genre fusion of drama, of romance, and also coming of age. The use of green is almost prominent in the bathroom, as you can see, and the painting room scenes. In the bathroom, Kwon is shown in a cramped, confined space. you can see like the borders are not really that big. Okay, you know what I mean, right? The borders are not that big. But yeah, in film particularly, bathrooms are often used as a private space where characters confront their true selves. Here the setting reflects both his physical and psychological confinement, suggesting that he is trapped in a repetitive and harmful routine with no clear escape. In the painting room, Quinn is positioned in front of the canvas as he attempts to reconnect with art, particularly with the crane painting. In cinema, artistic expression is often used to reveal a character's mental state, subconscious desires, or internal conflict. In this context particularly, the painting represents Kwon's hope and his desire to break free from his reality and begin to recover. The green tone used in these scenes is not subtle enough to signify tranquility or new beginning, but rather ghostly and slightly unnatural. I think this contributes a little bit to the film's atmosphere of unease and paranoia, reflecting his own detachment from society and his increasing withdrawal into his own troubled mind, in support with the sound, which I will talk about later. At the same time, I am still loosely following convention by using color symbolically to reflect the protagonist's emotional state. However, instead of warmth or vibrancy, I use color to communicate discomfort and entrapment, and reshaping the convention to fit a more subdued and internalized experience. Next, cinematography. The camera work also follows a similar approach. I intentionally limited the range of shot types, relying mostly on medium shots and medium close-ups, while avoiding the wide establishing shots and close-up for most of my opening. In many films, establishing shots are used early on to orient viewer and create a clear sense of space, while close-ups are used to quickly build emotional connection with the protagonist and let the audience attention fall right onto them. But I removed this. I want to create a sense of restriction and subtle disorientation, as if Kwon's world is so closed in and difficult to really fully access. This also meant that Kwon is not introduced in a conventional way. In many films, the main character is revealed through a clear close-up early on, for example, close-up, like the face. As, for example, they look in the mirror and we see their face. And this helps to establish their identity and importance right away. But I chose to withhold this. His face is often partially obscured or not shown at all throughout the routine sequence, which makes him feel more distant and his identity more fragmented, as if his presence is not very strong. I think this helps position himself as someone who is not fully present in his own life. You can see here, the first close-up only appears when Kwon looks at himself in the bathroom mirror, where we, the viewers, act as the bathroom mirror looking back at him. Because I had without close-up up until this point, it became both the audience's first clear view of him and a moment of self-recognition for the character. While this still followed the same convention of using close-ups for emotional emphasis, delaying it allows it to feel more significant and intentional, allowing the viewers to pay more attention to his facial expressions to draw meaning. I also use framing to reinforce the idea of entrapment. We can see a lot of center compositions and frame within frame, such as mirror reflections, visually isolating him and making him feel boxed in. Static shots contribute to a sense of stillness, while overhead angles, just as the table here, look down on him and make him feel small and passive within his own environment. These choices align with the common techniques used in drama and psychological storytelling to express vulnerability, but also by limiting shot variety and delaying key visual moments, I think that I was able to make the opening feel more restrained and less immediately accessible to the audience. Now, I think that, I'm going to move on to lighting conventions. Okay. Lighting is one of the most important conventions I use to shape the emotional world of my film opening. And as you can see, I have the two pictures here to better contrast the whole two worlds of the present and the past. In the present life, I intentionally use a low-key, shadow-heavy composition, In doing so, I conform to the conventions of psychological drama, where low-key lighting is commonly used to suggest internal conflict, instability, and underlying problems within a character, because, well, Kwon does have problems. The use of shadows and limited illumination creates a tense, isolating atmosphere, visually reinforcing his own emotional stagnation and mental claustrophobia. In contrast, we can see that the flashback sequences conform to another well-established convention: the use of high-key, dreamlike lighting to represent memory. Flashbacks in film often utilize bright, soft, or slightly overexposed lighting to distinguish the past from the present and to create a sense of nostalgia or emotional distance. I follow this convention by presenting these moments with very luminous, high-key visuals that feel warmer and more unreal than reality. This suggests to the audience that these scenes exist in his memory rather than in real time and help them to distinguish between the present and the past. This is, of course, supported by the use of student costuming and other technical choices. Additionally, the brightness is pushed slightly beyond naturalism. It's very, very bright almost to like strip off every color. It looks very real because there's no color grading, and this creates a faint overexposure that suggests distortion rather than pure nostalgia. The past is not presented objectively, but as Kwon remembers it, filtered, idealized, somewhat exaggerated. And I think this reflects how we, as audience, also remember our own past experiences. So this introduces ambiguity, hinting that even his happy memories may not be entirely reliable. The audience wonders to themselves if these footage are real and belong to Kwon's perception of his own past, or if they're a product of his own imagination as a form of escapism from his own suffocating and real present. The sharp contrast between the steam and green tinted present and the luminous flashbacks function as a narrative device, and through lighting, I think that I successfully let the audience understand that he exists between two emotional states, and how he refuses to let go of the past. In this way, lighting is used effectively to reveal character psychology and deepens the emotional stakes. Reflecting on this, I think I was able to use lighting as a storytelling tool, guiding the audience through the fragmented way that he himself experienced time, memory, and loss, and also highlight the difference between the two different timelines in collaboration with color grading and cinematography. Now let's move on to our last component, which is sound. There is a video, so please lower the volume if it's very large. Okay. Let's listen for a little bit before. Okay, what's wrong with this? Okay, let's start again. Okay, that's enough. In many films, everyday routines are paired with light, upbeat, non-diegetic music to create a sense of comfort and normality. Scenes of grief or instability, on the other hand, often use darker cues like drones, distortion, or ominous scores. I avoided both of these conventions. In most Western dramas, the morning routine as a film opening motive is incredibly common. It's as a way to establish character and is frequently used, supported by non-diegetic sound that reinforces that characterization. Sequences showing a character going through everyday morning routine appears across films such as American Psycho, where Patrick Bateman's meticulous timed routine is paired with almost controlled, almost clinical voiceover and music, emphasizing his obsession with perfection and control. Or The Devil Wears Prada, which uses upbeat, rhythmic music to contrast between two different lifestyles, or even Breaking Bad, where the quiet, restrained domestic soundscape frames Walter White's ordinary life before it unravels. I conform to these conventions through Kwon's morning routine, which immediately communicates key aspects of his own character. The fact that he wakes up at exactly 6 a.m. every single day suggests discipline, rigidity, and a need for control. However, it is the use of sound that becomes the most significant. Let's get into it. Rather than using non-diegetic music to create a clear, comforting tone, the sound in the 1001st Crane works alongside the visuals to subtly destabilize the sequence. Typically, morning routines are accompanied by music that clearly guides the audience interpretation, often light, rhythmic, or even jolly to signal normality, or the complete opposite to signify instability or introspection. In contrast, my use of non-diegetic sound resists that clarity, and instead of reinforcing that stable sense of routine, it introduces unease, suggesting that Kwon's tightly controlled lifestyle is beginning to fracture. Specifically, I would like to talk about the music that's added to this routine sequence. That is the monotonous, repetitive, rock-influenced instrumental of Olivia Rodrigo's Bad Idea Right. The original song is characterized by high chord melody tension, where the vocal line frequently clashes with the underlying guitar harmony. Even in the instrumental form that I use, this dissonance is preserved through the harmonic structure and tonal quality of the track. And this creates a persistent sense of friction, preventing the audience from settling into the routine as something stable or comforting. And instead of sounding smooth or resolved, the music feels slightly off, which mirrors his own internal instability. As audiences see the days pass, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the track repeats and becomes faster and messier, which supports the visuals as the cuts also get shorter. This builds a more intense, almost thrilling effect. Repetition in sound typically reinforces normality or habit, aligning with his own visual routine of waking up every day, cutting his eggs, stirring coffee, writing notes, working. Furthermore, as the track builds towards the pre-chorus, the rising melody and intensifying texture create a gradual escalation of tension. This musical climb produces a sensation similar to an adrenaline rush. The kind of energy that precedes reckless or impulsive action. This is significant because it foreshadows a loss of control, contradicting the position of Kwon's current routine that built up to the smash cut to black before he opened his drawer and grabbed his paint and start painting again. The sound, therefore, somehow contradicts the visuals, while images suggest that he is doing something disciplined and very orderly. The music implies instability and imminent disruption. In this way, while I follow the conventional structure of the morning routine as an establishing device, I challenge its usual use of sound by making it ambiguous and unsettling rather than straightforward. At the same time, you can see that a lot of diegetic sound is heard throughout the sequence, such as glass tinkling, a spoon stirring, running water, pen on paper scribbling, to ground the sequence in realism. This follows a conventional use of synchronous sound to support the visuals and make the world feel more believable and real to the audience. But these sounds are kept minimal and repetitive and links back to the theme of routine rather than emotion. Overall, in reflection, I think that the sound design of the 1001st Crane mixes convention with subversion. It uses a familiar structure, non-diegetic score, plus diegetic sound realism, but also it shifts the purpose, because instead of reinforcing that emotion, it creates a distance and ambiguity. I think this worked because it builds discomfort without being too obvious or forcing and feeling down the audience throats. The audience is not directly told how to feel, and the soundtrack does not push them into a clear emotional path or response, but rather is designed to gradually change in pacing and speed over time in support of the visuals to subtly foreshadow a disruption in equilibrium. So that's the end of my CCR1 Codes and Conventions. Thank you a lot for listening, and for more content, please check out the blog post on What's the Verdict.